Good morning and welcome to All Faith Sunday service. It is Sunday, May 10th, and happy Mother's Day to all mothers and those who mother. I have a couple of announcements this morning. The ACMA, who usually holds their concerts here in our sanctuary on Saturdays, they obviously have not been able to do that. However, if you go to their website, you'll be able to see the performers perform live. So go to the ACMA website and there'll be a list of performers and how to access those performances. You can access our service from our website and on YouTube after the service, of course. Keep checking your email for Zoom meetings and other announcements. And today is Share the Plate Sunday, and we are sharing 10% of our offertory with Meals of Hope. Whoever you are, wherever you are on your spiritual journey, and no matter whom you love, you are welcome here. Please join in singing hymn number 361, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In. Please join in our chalice lighting words, which are printed in your order of service. And once we light the chalice, we'll be singing Spirit of Life. We light this chalice for mothers and mothering to celebrate those who have taken on the task of nurturing, nourishing, and growing compassionate minds and hearts. When we are gathered, we share the joys and sorrows we have felt with the congregation, and I name a couple of joys and sorrows offered to me this morning. And remember that if you would like to share a joy or a sorrow with the congregation, you can email me or contact me, and I'll be sure to read it aloud. A couple of joys and sorrows for this morning is Nancy Patone. Her husband is in the ICU with a pulmonary embolism, and she asks that we hold her husband and his family in our hearts. Kendra Maroon and Donna Lieberman have lost their pet, their cat Sammy. We hold them in their hearts. And let us share a few moments of silence. We gather this morning to seek truth, to grow in love, and to join in service, to celebrate life's beauty and to find healing for its pain, to honor our kinship with each other and with the earth, to create a more compassionate world beginning with ourselves, to wonder at the mystery that gave us birth, to find courage for the journey's end, and to listen for the wisdom that guides us in the quietness of this 1 hour this morning. It is good to be together.
In the morning when you I bless the sun, I bless the skies. I bless your lips, I bless your eyes. My blessing goes with you. In the nighttime when you sleep, oh, I bless you while a watch I keep. As you lie in slumber deep, my blessing goes with you. This is my prayer for you, there for you, ever true. Each, every day for you, in everything you do. And when you come to me, hold me close to you, I bless you, and you bless me too. When your weary heart is tired, if the world would leave you uninspired, when nothing more of love's desired, my blessing goes with you. When the storms of life are strong, when you're wounded, when you don't belong, when you no longer hear my song, my blessing goes with you. This is my prayer for you, there
Our reading this morning is titled, I Am My Mother's Daughter by Brenda Holiday. Whenever my kids have a party at school, I am the mom who always signs up to bring the juice boxes. It's not because I'm lazy or that I don't care that my kids have a good party. I am just not wired in such a way that I can fashion sandwiches, anything homemade, gluten-free, organic, sugar-free, nut-free, and make them all into holiday-shaped treats. Nor am I the mother who can make centerpieces that are totally precious using nothing but dental floss and a milk carton. And I'm perfectly fine with that, even though it's taking me a long time to get here. Alpha moms, with their ability to make gourmet meals from scratch, to keep a spotless house, and scrapbook every minute of their child's lives, used to intimidate me. I felt that because I stayed home with my kids, I should have been able to do those things too. So when the turkey-shaped cookies I painstakingly decorated turned out looking like little round pieces of poop, or when company stopped by and there were toys strewn from one end of the house to the other, because instead of picking up, I'd been busy cutting my child out of the dental floss he'd somehow managed to wrap around his entire body while I took a shower, I ended up feeling like a failure as a mother. I felt as though I was letting my kids down because I couldn't do the things their friends' mothers did without messing everything up and freaking out. After many failed attempts at baking and crafting and many afternoons spent crying over my inabilities as a mother, I finally, rather begrudgingly, resigned myself to the fact that my lot in life is to be the juice box mom. I worked hard to be the best juice box mom at the elementary school, and after one of my daughter's class parties, it actually paid off. Her teacher stopped me as I was leaving and said, "Thank you so much for always bringing extra drinks." And sometimes parents forget that younger siblings will also be attending class parties, and they'd end up being left out because we don't have enough for everyone. I just accepted the compliment rather than telling her I brought extra drinks because I never could remember how many kids were in the class. But her compliment taught me an important lesson. It taught me just because I'm not crafty or overly domestic, I'm not a failure as a mother. Not everyone is cut out to be an alpha mother, and there's nothing wrong with that. I believe it's okay to be the juice box mom. I may not bake cookies and decorate them to look like something straight out of Martha Stewart Living, but I do provide something to wash them down with, and I think that's just as important. And so ends the reading.
Lady of the season's laughter, in the summer's warmth we hear, when the winter follows after, teach our spirit.
Mother's Day owes its credit to 19th century abolitionist, social activist, poet, and Unitarian Julia Ward Howe. Howe was the author of the Battle Hymn of the Republic and became sickened by the bloodshed of the Civil War, and in 1870 she wrote a Mother's Day proclamation and calling women around the world to speak out for peace. She wrote, "Our sons shall not be taken from us, to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience." She also wrote that we, the women of one country, will be tender of those of another country, to allow our sons to not be trained to injure theirs. The Reverend Stephen Johansen, a Canadian Unitarian historian, tells us that the following year, 18 cities had held a gathering. Bostonians continued to observe this day of gathering for more than a decade, while some cities continued the observance until the turn of the century, when the annual Mother's Day for Peace appears to have died out. And in 1907, Anna Jarvis, a Methodist, began a campaign to establish a permanent Mother's Day. By the following year, the YMCA had taken up the case, and in 1914, Woodrow Wilson signed a congressional resolution establishing Mother's Day in the United States. In time, the day came to be marked in many other countries, but Jarvis was troubled by the commercialization of the day, saying, "I want it to be a day of sentiment, not a day of profit." She was opposed to the sale of flowers, but not the giving of homegrown blossoms, and she also lamented the advent of Mother's Day cards, describing it as a poor excuse for a letter or that you were too lazy to write. Interestingly enough, Mother's Day is one of the most heavily attended Sundays in North American churches, normally, outside of the Christmas and Easter seasons. In Unitarian Universalist congregations, the day has increasingly taken on a sense of being a day to mark the contributions of all women. And Julia Ward Howe was born in New York in 1819 to a wealthy banker. She had family in Boston, and through them encountered Unitarianism, reading and hearing and meeting William Ellery Channing, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Margaret Fuller. She married Samuel Howe, who worked as an educator of children with multiple handicaps, and she switched from the Episcopal religion of her youth to Unitarianism, attending Theodore Parker's church, which was the nexus of the radical anti-slavery movement. The hymn that Julia Ward Howe wrote, Battle Hymn of the Republic, included in the 30s era Unitarian hymnal, Hymns of the Spirit, was published in the Atlantic magazine in 1862 and increased Julia Ward Howe's prominence as a writer and a speaker. So it's important to our story. She tells about writing this hymn in her autobiography. She writes, "We were invited one day to attend a review of the troops at some distance from the town. My dear minister was in carriage with me, as were several other friends, and to beguile the rather tedious drive, we sang from time to time snatches of the army song so popular at that time, concluding, I think, with John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the ground, his soul marching on. And the soldiers seemed to like this and answered back, good for you. And Mr. Clark said, Mrs. Howe, why do you not write some good words for that stirring tune? And the rest is history." The history of Mother's Day reminds us that it is more than a day for flowers and for brunches. It's a time to highlight the aspects of motherhood that are not usually visible in the greeting card aisles. It's a call to honor the resiliency of all those who mother, especially those who bear the brunt of hurtful policies or who are weighed down by stigma in our culture. It's an opportunity to take action to create the conditions so that all families can thrive. An opportunity to take action to create conditions where we can have the peace called for on the original Mother's Day. I had prepared a decent Mother's Day sermon a couple times this week, but I ripped both of them up. All week I've been nagged by the tragedy in Georgia, the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, a black jogger. A graphic video of the final moments of the 25-year-old's life shows him jogging on a suburban road when two armed white men, Gregory McMichael and his son Travis, approach in a pickup truck. The younger men tussle, the gunshots boom, and Arbery staggers, then collapses. The recent release of the grisly footage sparked widespread horror, leading authorities to arrest McMichaels on murder charges 74 days after Arbery was killed. Authorities had the information and evidence to arrest, but did nothing. And let us be clear, there was an investigation not because authorities saw the video, but because we saw the video. Just in time for Mother's Day, Wanda Cooper Jones, mother of Arbery, had joined a sorority no woman wants any part of. Her youngest son was shot during a Sunday afternoon jog back in February by two men who looked at him and saw a monster. She will get a lot of attention this Mother's Day, but not the kind she would like, or the kind that she is accustomed to. Not the sweet and earnest gestures from a loving son, a card, some flowers, maybe some pancakes on a breakfast in bed tray. Her day will be instead full of grief and rage. A hole in her heart and an empty chair at the table, it will be filled with calls of condolence. Mother's Day has always held a special significance for Wanda. Ahmaud was born on Mother's Day in 1994. He would have turned 26 this year. The Washington Post writes, with Ahmaud's senseless death, Wanda Cooper joined the groups of grieving black women whose sons and daughters' names have turned into grief-soaked hashtags. And she joins the group that calls itself the Circle of Mothers, women who understand what it is like for the world to suddenly know your child's name for the very worst of reasons. Trayvon Martin, Jordan Davis, Renisha McBride, Michael Brown, Philando Castile. So many names. Too many names. And I remind you of some of the words of the 19th century Mother's Day proclamation. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. We, the women of one country, will be too tender of those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs. And as Unitarian Universalists, we take a bite out of long-term oppression and the effects of such oppression. And I wonder if our work is too passive. Since the 1955 murder of teenager Emmett Till, whose mother insisted on an open casket for her son's mutilated body, the civil rights movement has often articulated its grievances through the suffering of mothers. It is an unbelievable task to be a mother to a black child in America. Listen to some of the stories black mothers will be reminded of this morning and every day of their lives. Trayvon Martin was shot in the chest while walking home from a convenience store by George Zimmerman, a member of the police-administered Neighborhood Watch. Zimmerman was initially released without arrest, then a second-degree murder charge was brought amid intense media scrutiny. After pleading self-defense, citing Florida's Stand Your Ground law, Zimmerman was acquitted of all charges. Amadou Diallo was standing by his apartment building when 4 police officers claiming to have mistaken his wallet for a gun fired at him 41 times, hitting him 19 times. And a grand jury indicted the 4 officers, but they were cleared of all charges by a jury at trial. Early on the morning of his wedding, Sean Bell and his friends got into their car and were approached by a group of plainclothes police officers. 5 of the 7 officers on the scene shot 50 bullets into the car, killing Sean and gravely injuring his friends. 3 of the 5 officers were indicted by a grand jury. All pleaded not guilty and were acquitted on all charges. After being accused of selling loose cigarettes by a police officer, Daniel Pantaleo, Eric Garner was handcuffed, pushed to the ground, and placed in a chokehold. Garner gasped, "I can't breathe," 11 times before losing consciousness. None of the 6 officers present attempted to resuscitate Garner. A grand jury failed to indict Pantaleo on any charges. After being stopped for an alleged minor traffic violation, Sandra Bland was heard accusing Texas State Trooper Brian Encenia of assaulting her as she was being arrested. 3 days later, she was found hanged using a garbage bag that had been left in her cell. The police deemed it a suicide, which her family disputes, and Encenia was later dismissed and charged with perjury. Let us assume that racism is everywhere, every day. Just as economics influences everything we do, just as gender and gender politics influence everything we do, assume that racism is affecting your daily life. We assume this because it's true, and because the privilege of being white is the freedom to not deal with racism all the time, every day. Notice who is at the center of attention and who is at the center of power. Racism works by directing violence and blame toward people of color and consolidating power and privilege for white people. Notice how racism is denied, minimized, and justified. Understand and learn from the history of whiteness and racism. Understand the connections between racism, economic issues, sexism, and other forms of injustice. Intervene in situations where racism is being passed on. We need to intervene in racism when it's being passed on. This Mother's Day is the perfect day to make our own proclamation, learning from the women in our movement who are concerned about those they mother and the violence that is taking their lives. This is how we will honor women past and present, to become allies in peace, justice-making, and growing in love. May it be so. Each Sunday before the offertory, I offer you a joke. And this joke comes from Greg Monk. And before I offer the joke, I'd like to offer our appreciation for your generous gifts. Forrest Gump passed away and goes to heaven. He's at the pearly gates and he met St. Peter himself. And however, the gates are closed and Forrest approaches the gatekeeper. And St. Peter said, "Well, Forrest, it's really nice to see you. We've heard a lot about you. But I have to tell you that this place is filling up really fast, and we've been administering an entrance examination for everyone. And the test is short, but you must pass it before you can go into heaven." Forrest replied, "It's good to be here, St. Peter, sir, but no one ever informed me of my entrance exam, and I hope that the test is not too hard. Life was a big enough test as it was. And St. Peter continues, yes, I know, Forrest, but the test only has 3 questions. First, what 2 days of the week begin with the letter T? Second, how many seconds are there in a year? And 3, what is God's first name? Forrest leaves to think these questions over, and the next day he comes back and he sees St. Peter, who waves at him and says, now that you have had a chance to think about the questions, tell me your answers. And Forrest says, well, in the first one, what 2 days of the week begin with the letter T? It's easy. That's today and tomorrow. And the saint's eyes open wide, and he exclaims, Forrest, that's not what I was thinking, but you do have a point, and I guess I didn't specify, so I'll give you credit for that one. How about the next one, asked St. Peter. How many seconds are there in a year? Now that one's even harder, said Forrest, but I think I thought about it, and I guess the only answer can be 12. Confused, St. Peter said, 12? How in heaven's name could you come up with 12 seconds in a year? And Forrest says, there's got to be 12. January 2nd, February 2nd, March 2nd, April 2nd, and so on. Hold it, said St. Peter. I see where you're going with this, and I see your point, though that wasn't quite what I had in mind, but I'll give you credit for it. Now, how about the third question? What is, can you tell me God's first name? And Forrest says, that's easy. It's Andy. Andy, said St. Peter. How did you come up with Andy? And Forrest says, that was the easiest one of all. I learned it from the song, Andy walks with me. Andy talks with me. Andy tells me I am his own. And so St. Peter opened the pearly gates and said, run, Forrest, run.
I know I took the path that you would never want for me. I know I let you down, didn't I? So many sleepless nights where you were waiting up on me. I'm just a servant to the night. Now remember when I told you that's the last you'll see of me. Remember when I broke you down to tears. I know I took the path that you would never want for me. I gave you hell through all the years. So I bet my life, I bet my life, I bet my life on you. And I bet my life, I bet my life, I bet my life on you. I've been around the world, but never in my wildest dreams would I come running home to you. I've told a million lies, but now I tell a single truth. There's you in everything I do. Now remember when I told you that's the last you'll see of me. Remember when I broke you down to tears. I know I took the path that you would never want for me. I gave you hell through all the years. So I bet my life, I bet my life, I bet my life on you. And I bet my life, I bet my life, I bet my life on you. Don't tell me that I'm wrong. I've walked that road before and left you on your own. And please believe me when I say that it's left for yesterday in the records that I've played. Please forgive for all that I've done. So I bet my life, I bet my life, I bet my life on you. And I bet my life, I bet my life, I bet my life on you.
one thing finally required of us, that is to take life whole, the sunlight and the shadows together, to live the life that is given to us with courage and humor and truth. We have such a limited time, a little moment out of the vastness of that time for all of our wondering and all of our loving. Therefore, let there be no half-heartedness. Let the soul be ardent in its pain, in its yearning, in its praise. Then shall peace enfold our days, and glory shall not fade from our lives. Happy Mother's Day. Blessed be.
May God bless and keep you always. May your wishes all come true. May you always do for others, let others do for you. May you build a ladder to the stars, and climb on every rung, and may you stay forever young. Forever young, forever young. May you stay forever young. May you grow up to be righteous. May you grow up to be true. May you always know the truth and see the light surrounding you. May you always be courageous and stand upright and be strong, and may you stay forever young. Forever young, forever young. May you stay forever young. May your hands always be busy. May your feet always be swift. May you have a strong foundation when the winds of changes shift. May your heart always be joyful. May your song always be sung. And may you stay forever young. Forever young, forever young. May you stay forever
Please join in the words printed in your order of service as I extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and out into the world.